Hi everyone, this is Menz here. I'm going to be breaking down the Löwe's armor, and basically this video is going to go hand in hand with one of my weak spot guides on my website, watguru.com. You can find a video link, or not a video link, a link to the weak spot guide in question in the video description below, and also at the end of this video. Now, the Löwe has undergone about, I would say, 2-3 major changes since it's been introduced into World of Tanks. It's one of the original premium tanks, and basically most recently it got a pretty significant armor buff. Now, looking at its armor here, the upper glacis is pretty strong for your tier 8 heavy tank, 268 millimeters effective armor. Now that takes into account the slope of the angle, but it doesn't take into account normalization, since AP, APCR, they have different values. Be too much information to throw out there, but heat shells, pretty much that's the value that heat has to go through. AP, APCR, it'll be a little bit weaker than that. But basically, looking at the upper glacis, most things are not going to want to shoot it anymore. The upper glacis can pretty much bounce even tier 10 shots. Granted, tier 10s or premium rounds, tier 10 TDs can still go through it somewhat easily. Now, moving a little bit further down, you get to the top part of the lower glacis. 225 millimeters effective there. It's not angled anyway, but it's very thick. That's pretty difficult, even for 10s sometimes can bounce off of it, but for some 9s, 8s, 7s, 6s, don't shoot there either. But once you start getting down to the sweet spot, the middle of the lower glacis bumps down from 225 down to 120 millimeters, and even though it's angled, it's only 139 millimeters effective. Pretty much everything coming across the Löwe can penetrate it pretty easily. But once you get to the very bottom of the lower glacis, it actually is stronger than the upper glacis. It's 300 millimeters effective, so do not shoot the very bottom part, because you will bounce off of it. Now, moving up, further up here, I can't exactly zoom in since this is clipped out of what I do in Photoshop for the weak spot guide. The weak spot guide goes into more specifics, and it can be a little bit easier to actually see the more finer details. But looking at the turret front here, the Löwe has always basically had a very strong turret. It's gotten buffed a few times because World of Tanks is kind of power creep tanks, but looking at the turret front here, pretty much almost all of it is impenetrable, outside of this thin little strip that runs right around the mantlet. So going over to this little blurb over here, I start out with the mantlet. Don't shoot it. It's pretty much impenetrable. There's a couple little areas that some premium rounds or tier 10 TDs and stuff might get through, but it's just not worth shooting it. Now, the turret front weak spot, it's kind of relating to this little thin strip here. At its weakest, it's 199 millimeters effective. It's very small to hit. Basically, the flat part on the turret front right next to the mantlet. It's not easy to hit at all, but basically that just relates to this very center part. Once you start getting higher or lower, I got that backwards. It goes to 220 and then all the way up above 400 millimeters effective. An easier spot to shoot at is beneath the mantlet here. You don't want to hit the upper glacis, you don't want to hit the mantlet, but basically aiming beneath the mantlet, it's only 178 millimeters effective. So if you can hit this, it's actually pretty damn easy to penetrate for most tanks facing the Löwe. Now, tier 7, tier 6, it's going to be hard to actually hit that area and go through regularly, but higher tiers, it's possible. If for whatever reason you don't have a shot in the lower glacis or something. The cupola here, I actually enlarged a little bit for my guide. It's not as big as you might think it is, and it's located in the back of the Löwe, and it's pretty tall tank, so it's hard to actually hit this. But the cupola itself does have the weakest area on the front. The very bottom center part of it, so only tall tanks can hit this, or if you're slightly above it, is 86 millimeters effective. And then the bottom part of the edges of the cupola, Over here, 150 in the top center, 176. So as long as you don't hit the top outer edges of the cupola, it's pretty easy to penetrate, but actually hitting it is very difficult because it is a very tall tank and the cupola is not exactly towards the front. If I can, I'll just zoom in here. So most tanks aren't even gonna see this, you know, in most cases, so you're better off hitting just beneath the mantlet here. You can kind of see what I'm pointing out. The mantlet covers most of it, but it is pretty darn weak for most tanks. And then you have the lower glacis here. Now, moving on to the side here, so let me get this as close as I can. So moving on to the side here, you see the armor dramatically drops as far as its strength. Most of it, you know, is still above 100 millimeters effective, but for a tier 8, that's still pretty darn weak. You know, for the side hull, the weakest area is the part not covered by the tracks. So if for whatever reason your penetration is really poor, try to shoot right above the tracks in that little gap. And there's also the side of the turret here that's only 85 millimeters effective. But for the most part, all these yellow bits are easy for almost everything to penetrate that usually faces the Löwe. Now, there are a couple red areas towards the front of the turret that are strong because of their thickness, their angle, what have you. And the cupola is actually a little bit easier to hit from the side view. Not that I'd exactly shoot there, I'd rather shoot, you know, at one of the easier parts of the hit, but it is there. And this very big mantlet on this tank. Avoid shooting it, you're not going to do any HP damage. And then getting to the rear finally, it's not exactly very strong either. Pretty much all the armor is on the front. And, you know, for the most part, just avoid hitting the engine deck. If you don't have a large caliber gun, you're going to bounce off of it. But, you know, for tanks with 121, so basically 122 millimeters plus, you're going to be able to overmatch it. But the rest of the armor is pretty damn weak outside of the angled edges of the turret rear and also a little couple bits of the cupola. But for the most part, just shoot at the rear hull, shoot at the back of the turret, and you are golden. But as far as this tank goes, it has received, you know, gun depression buff and armor buff, mainly when it concerns its frontal armor, and it actually does have quite a bit of armor now that you have to contend with. Hopefully this guide helped you out. Like I said, feel free to check out the full guide on my website, wattguru.com. There's a link in the video description, and it should also pop up here. Don't know exactly when, but it's probably up already. But thanks again for watching this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it and it helped you out a bit. Thanks for watching, and have a very good day.